En noviembre y estamos muy felices con este panel. Estamos en el cuarto Congreso de Construcción de Paz con Perspectiva de Género, organizado por Peace and Sport, la Organización por la Paix par le Sport de Mónaco, y el Programa de Género e Inclusión de la Universidad Iberoamericana Ciudad de México. Estamos felices con este panel, pues consideramos que a través del deporte se pueden enseñar y practicar estrategias y valores que ayudan a la igualdad de género, a hacer vida a los derechos humanos y la paz. Tenemos con nosotros el día de hoy para moderar este panel a Lorena Rodríguez. Lorena es especialista en deporte para la paz, graduada de la Universidad Iberoamericana, cuenta con una maestría en paz y resolución de conflictos, trabajó como directora de comunicaciones e impacto de la organización Peace and Sport, ubicada en el Principado de Mónaco. Por más de 5 años, Lorena se ha dedicado a desarrollar campañas de sensibilización con comunidades en Colombia, Burundi y Jordania para promover el deporte como herramienta de construcción de paz e inclusión social. Actualmente trabaja para la Organización Internacional Acción contra el Hambre como responsable de campañas y movilización a nivel nacional en Francia.
In France. Thank you very much and welcome, Lorena. Welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you and good morning, everyone. It's a great honor for me to be a part of this international panel with panelists who are from different parts of the world.
En Francia, en Portugal, realmente es un verdadero gusto. Quisiera agradecer a la Universidad Iberoamericana, a Elvia, por esta invitación. Es mi tercer año que participo. Así que,
bueno, it's the third time I participate. This panel called Gender, Human Rights, Peace and Sports is one that is very pertinent in today's context. Today, the world is facing challenges. Where we were before and where we're going next is changing. I'd like to share with you today that this year was the 75th anniversary of the UN, and to celebrate this anniversary, a consultation was made internationally to ask what the expectations and fears for the future were. And after more than 6 years of consultation, more than 1 million people answered to this, responded to this consultation. And the main concerns
de la necesidad de atacar la desigualdad social que existe en el mundo. La segunda prioridad era el tema del cambio climático y la tercera era la necesidad de mayor cooperación internacional.
And international cooperation and global solidarity. And with these three priorities that were brought to light, it is important to point out the role that sports can play by creating this future where in the world we will have a world of equity, and this will also be at some point crossed with climate change, and the value of sports will be promoted so as to foster a greater solidarity in the world. In Europe, and before I give the floor to Carlos, there are two different situations that happened recently. The first has been the announcement by the Commonwealth Games that will take place in Birmingham in 2022. And recently, in the last few weeks, for the first time in the history of the games of such a magnitude, will have more medals for women than for male categories, which is very symbolic, this announcement, because there will be 136 medals that will be distributed into female categories and 134 for male categories.
El segundo anuncio que se esté llevando a
The
cabo
second announcement relates to the meeting of Ministers of Sports organized by the European Council, which began this week and which will conduct an assessment of the European Sports Charter. This Sports Charter, the element that will be most widely discussed in these meetings early in December is human rights, how to place human rights at the core of the European Sports Charter. And with these two announcements come also the calling from 118 member states of the UN, which have requested sports and physical activities to be included in the national recovery plans and for them to encompass sports and physical activities in the agenda for sustainable development goals. This is a request that more than ever, a request for, or a call that must be heard more than ever. And with this reflection of looking into the future, I would like to now give the floor to Carlos Manuel Pereira, who is a member of the directive board of the Portuguese sports organization and a member of the scientific committee of the Autonomous University as well. He has a master in sports management and in by the Lisbon University Institute, director of the cycling institution and head of the sports for municipality of Areiras, regional director of the Portuguese Institute for Sports and Youth, and a member of the board of directors of Bovi Jovem, an entity responsible for managing the network of youth shelters. And Carlos will be presenting the link with actions related to youth. He will be presenting for the next 15 minutes. And just very quickly, I'd like to explain how this is going to be done, how the panel is going to be done. Every panelist will have 15 minutes to talk, and then we will have a Q&A where you will be able to write in the corresponding chat. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Carlos for his lecture.
Lorena, obrigado. Quero também cumprimentar Elvia Gonzalez e
Good morning, everyone.
dirigido ao Instituto Português do Desporto e Juventude. É prazer estar convosco.
It is a pleasure to
do Comitê Paralímpico
address you all.
Do Ministério da Europa e dos Assuntos Exteriores.
Carlos,
Sim.
un segundo.
One moment.
Sí. Los técnicos pueden... Sí, ¿quieren que le pida
Carlos,
que continúe?
El micrófono.
Si el tema es el idioma, se le entiende muy bien.
Carlos, ¿puedes desactivar tu micrófono? ¿Activarlo? Aquí.
Está ativado. Penso que posso prosseguir, pelo que eu entendo. Então, vou prosseguir. Portanto, estava a cumprimentar e dizer que é gosto imenso estar com
I would just like to say that it's a great pleasure to be with you and participate in this conference, particularly, and as Lorena has already said, because this conference, well, is marked the celebration of the 75th year of UN. And the presentation that I have for you today is one where I share part of my perspective concerning the world overview today of the topic that brings us here today. I think particularly for the youth, this issue of gender equality and peace are factors that have an impact, a positive impact in life. And I would like to talk about the perspective of the Sports and Youth Institute with some data on the gender situation and the peace situation in Portugal, as well as discuss the some of the policies for sports and peace with a gender perspective. I will also be sharing a few of the good practices I consider some of the programs that are organized not only in Portugal, but also in Ibero-America. And finally, I will discuss what can be or what is known as the main interventions in these processes with a multilateral perspective, constituting a part of the UN agenda for the promotion of peace. And for this purpose, we will be able to see it from the international perspective in the case of the United Nations and of other levels which have a very robust perspective from the perspective of human rights and promotion of peace. From the context of political liaisoning and for action. From the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, we can also emphasize that the International Year of Youth in 1985, with the topic of participation, development, and peace, the program for action on youth for 2020 and forward emphasizes, and the same was the case for Portugal, where in 1998 and 2000 there was a conference where the statements from the authorities are about ending all forms of discrimination, specifically on young women, and guarantee their human rights. And therefore, in a global context, the promotion of gender equality was favorable in general, but more specifically in sports, in the context of the UN. And therefore, we have this very special characteristic where we are able to participate in many contexts of multilateral cooperation to achieve equality between men and women through sports in a very clear way. The social dimension of sports, and through it, the access to rights in the European context. With a strategic European actions regarding youth. Of course, also the process of rights and equality being very relevant as well. And just as Lorena has already said, the European Charter and the European Council, in the case of Portugal, we must also mention some of the political instruments in the community of countries that speak the Portuguese-speaking countries, and in the Ministers' Conference also underlines the need for a peace and stability measure in the post-conflict scenarios, where violence is one of the main concerns.
Se calhar, gostava de...
And the Ibero-American context, the role of the committee must be emphasized, which last year promoted the first virtual presentation on women in sports, as well as the work conducted by the Youth Organization of Ibero-America, which not only included the Ibero-American Convention on the Youth Rights, but which was organized in Colombia, which also emphasizes the need to promote peace. And therefore, in the international robust concept, we must also emphasize that in the case of Portugal, with the mission of the Portuguese mission for youth and sports and other institutions that highlight two very important spheres, such as equality for all people, regardless of their gender or sexual orientation, race, or ethnicity, for them to be able to practice sports, as well as the production of sports ethics documentation literature. So the context is favorable. However, in the case of Portugal, in the case of the participation of males and females in sports, there is still inequality. 19% in the case of female referees, 9% for coaches. So there's still a long way to go. In the last few years, actions were primarily in favor of men, and therefore actions are needed to balance the gender situation. And on the other hand, we must also admit that there is gender violence. This scenario, the numbers are not great, and there are indications that, especially concerning the youth, legitimation of violence, gender violence, is an issue. And controlling situations of men over their partners, violence and sexual violence situations which are normalized is a matter of concern to us. And this is something that can be found in life in general, but also in the sports context, and must be corrected. The numbers, but despite all of this, have a positive trend, but they continue to be, of course, more on the negative side. Now, concerning the best practices and programs in the case of Portugal, and I cannot really give an example in the American context, but we do have a strategy with national plans, 3 of them: the National Plan for Equality between Men and Women, and an action plan for the prevention and fighting against violence against women and or domestic violence, as well as the action plan to fight discrimination based on gender and race and sexual causes. Also, the set of actions planned in the program Deportes para Todos, or Sports for All, which has been in place since 2014 and which shows that it's possible to balance participation in sports. And according to the information that we have, these have a female participation greater than 50%. And this is possible we can see this in the sports practice. We further consider that these have been international evidences of cooperation, especially from the European Council and the European Commission, which have been of great help so that we can reach our objectives, whether in the struggle against violence in sports or the promotion of female sports practice. In 2017, we participated in the For Safe Sports project together with the European Council, aiming to find an answer against sexual violence against women and girls in sports. With the Start to Talk campaign in 2019, we had the objective of promoting anti-violence situation in the context of sports. And today we are about to continue with the next phase of the project. And this will allow us to develop a policy and an action plan, a comprehensive one for children in sports. So this is a project that we are very happy to share this with us. We will be happy to share the results of the conclusions with everyone. And finally, there is a project that together with the European Council is an Olympic project that includes gender equality in sports. We began with the survey concerning female participation in sports and social communication and violence in the context of sports practice. This set of tools that can help violence against sports, those who practice sports. This will help with 2 national plans for 2020. Middle term plan between 2020 and 2024, and the solid and stable methodologies that are backed on scientific evidence. And there is a city near Porto where a national conservatory of violence against athletes was constituted approximately 2 months ago, an electronic platform for the collection of information on violence against athletes, which is done in an anonymous way. And from here, it is possible to have a better understanding of victims and to achieve solutions and avoid complex situations. And finally, the national plan on sports practice, which has been ongoing since 2002. And based on this plan, there are 2 initiatives to highlight. One that was greatly inspired in the white card, in the ethics card, which is about the best practices of federations, municipalities, and several entities that are related to sports. And finally, the best Ibero-American practices. In Colombia or Medellin are units that help plan in the urban context the documentation of sports practice. And I don't want to overextend my presentation. So this is what I wanted to share with you, and it would be my great pleasure to answer to some of the questions you may have. I hope my presentation was clear, and I am very happy to hear now my colleagues. Thank you, Carlos. This has been a very interesting experience in Portugal concerning the different initiatives in the promotion of gender equality. And before we move on quickly to Rita, I would like to thank everyone who is currently here joining us in this panel from very early. It's early in Mexico City, so thank you all for connecting this morning. I'd like to quickly greet Oscar Mendiola, who is joining us. He was a gold medalist and silver medalist. He was also the head of trainers of a team in Athens 2004, where silver and bronze medals were won. Thank you for joining us today. And next, I'd like to give the floor to Rita Madril, who is a member of the Directive Board of the Paralympic International Committee. She has a very long history in the promotion of sports for people with disabilities in the Netherlands, her country of origin, and many other countries in the world. Since 2009, Rita has been a member of the governance board of IPC, and she's in her now her last year in this position. She is currently also the chair of the Women's Committee for Sports in IPC and a member of the Women's Commission in Sports of the Olympic International Committee. Rita works as a consultant with an approach in participation in sports. Thank you, Rita, and you now have the floor.
Thank you for the introduction. It's my great honor and great pleasure to be with you this morning. And wait a minute. Yes, I hope this works. Yes, to speak on behalf of the International Paralympic Committee on this very important topic. So it's great. It's always a bit weird not to know how many people watching and listening, but I hope we have a good audience, and I hope to inspire you with our great story. What I want to tell you about is who we are as International Paralympic Committee, what we do, and how all the things we do come together. And that relates really to the topic we are talking about today. The International Paralympic Committee has a clear purpose. We have a set of values that we believe in. And we want to create an inclusive world through parasport. And we lead the Paralympic movement, overseeing the delivery of the Paralympic Games and support members to enable para-athletes to achieve sporting excellence. The IPC has, since this year, a new strategic direction, focusing much more than before on human rights and transforming society. And we believe we can do that through sport. Change starts with sport. And there are many barriers to achieving a more inclusive society. And we have identified 3 areas that we would to focus on. And of course, we base all what we are doing on the UN Convention for the Rights for People with Disabilities. So, attitudes. The challenge is that persons with disability face discrimination daily. In many societies, people focus more on what doesn't work rather than on what does work. Whether conscious or unconscious, prejudice can be a barrier for persons with disabilities to reach their full potential. And the impact so far is that based on the Rio 2016 Paralympics, 79% of the Brazilians improved their perceptions of persons with disabilities. And imagine that 1 in 3 people in Great Britain, that's an equivalent of 20 million people, change their attitudes towards people with a disability because of the London Paralympic Games. So what our goal is that using the outstanding athletic performances of our para-athletes, we will help foster an inclusive society for persons with disabilities to live without prejudice. Mobility. The challenge is that persons with disabilities are not included in many areas of society because of the physical restrictions they face. This occurs at the global level within communities and even in their homes. The impact so far is that, for example, ahead of the Sochi 2014 Paralympic Games, it was ensured everything built for the Games was barrier-free. And Sochi is now a blueprint for 200 other Russian societies looking to further their own accessibility. And also for Beijing 2028 Paralympics, there was 120 million was spent on making 14,000 facilities accessible, including roads, transport hubs, and public buildings. So we have a huge impact in the cities where we are hosting the Paralympic Games. So our goal is to turn athletes into activists who use their profile to pressurize relevant authorities around the world into furthering accessibility and mobility for all by the 2030 Paralympic Games. And then the final one, opportunity. The challenge is that 15% of the world's population have some form of disability. But despite the potential that persons with disabilities offer society, they are more likely to have reduced access to education, healthcare, employment, and sport. The impact so far is that since Rio 2016, 85% increase in the number of persons with disabilities taking training courses, and a 49% increase in the employment of persons with disabilities in Brazil. And also in Great Britain, 1 million more persons with disabilities are employed since the Paralympic Games in London 2012. So our goal is for persons with disabilities in a Paralympic host country to benefit from equal opportunities in sport, education, and employment. If you want to know more about the Paralympic movement and the Paralympic Games, I would advise you to take a look at the documentary at Netflix. It's called Rising Phoenix, and it's an incredible documentary. And it's really interesting that also the French champion for peace from Peace and Sport, Jean-Baptiste Allais, is one of the persons that plays an important role in that documentary. So if you haven't done it, please take a look. So it's clear what we all do and what we want to achieve. And now the question is, how does it come together to this topic? And that's what I will tell you a little bit about. So as I mentioned, we support members of the International Paralympic Committee, which are national Paralympic committees and international federations to enable para-athletes to achieve sporting excellence. It doesn't mean that all what we do, that we expect all the participants in the end participate at the Paralympic Games. It's really also sport development. Here you see two pictures which I believe show what we are all about. The first picture is about the women's para-volleyball team from Rwanda. And in this team, and you know, I guess, that Rwanda has a tough history with a genocide between the Hutus and Tutsis in their country. And the victims of this genocide played together in this team. And it's wonderful that this Rwandan Paralympic para volleyball team was the first African team that qualified for the Paralympic Games. So they participated in Rio for the first time, and they will participate next year in the Tokyo Games. So it's a wonderful story where it all comes together through sport. The other picture is from the National Paralympic Committee in Iraq. And they are supported by different international federations because they have a lot of victims because of the war, of course, with the US. And here you see that they play wheelchair fencing. And how does these programs or the result of these programs come together? So here you see, for example, in the refugee camps we have in Europe a lot at the moment. And then in Greece, the National Paralympic of Greece, they do lots of programs within the refugee camps with persons with a disability. So it's really interesting that different NPCs work together, like Serbia, Greece, and Cyprus, and also international federations, for example, powerlifting, athletics, wheelchair fencing. They work together in these camps to give these persons with disability some perspective for the future. And you see a quote here from one of the participants that his life fully changed because of this program. So we are active in the refugee camps, and recently, it's last week announced that we will also participate the refugee Paralympic team in the Tokyo 2020, which will be hosted next year. A team with refugees that will participate. So we have confirmed the plans to send 6 athletes to Tokyo. And we are working with different organizations, but also with sponsors to do this as good as possible. The interesting thing is that this team, the chef de mission, she is also Ileana Rodriguez. She herself is a former refugee and a Paralympian in the London 2012 Games. So we believe this is a wonderful story to tell, and we really look forward to see which athletes will in the end participate. We know there is a lot of interest. There are many refugee athletes who we have on the picture, so it will be quite challenging for them to qualify for this team. But also at the Paralympic Games, it's incredible what happens there. And I told you about this Iraqi wheelchair fencer. He is a victim of the war between the US and Iraq. But also in the US team at the Paralympic Games, there are victims from the war, former soldiers who are now participating in the Paralympic team of the US. So you can imagine how, well, actually wonderful it is that they kind of meet again at the games. And sometimes they even play sport against each other. So that's what sport is about. But that's also what the Paralympic Games are about. So we are very proud on what we do and also about the stories we can tell like this. It's a fantastic, I believe it's a fantastic how it all comes together. So this almost ends my presentation. And we believe, as I said, change starts with sport. And here you see a picture. It's one of my favorite pictures from Sochi 2014. And just at the moment that the Paralympic Games were about to start, Russia entered the Ukrainian Crimea for annexation. So it was a very tough political situation. But in the end, we were happy that the Ukrainian team entered at the games, they participated. But here you see both presidents from the National Paralympic Committees from Russia and Ukraine having a conversation about what was going on. And I was watching it, and I was invited to be with them. But this is also what the Paralympic Games are and what sport does. So that, in short, is who we are as a Paralympic movement. And that I'm looking forward to get all kind of questions you might have. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Rita.
Thank you, Rita. It's truly a very inspiring presentation. And as you said, sports to build dialogue, to create relationships in political context, which may not necessarily be the easiest ones. And yes, it's important that everyone watches the documentary on Netflix because it is excellent. And Jean-Baptiste Dalez's story is very, very interesting. So now I'd like to give the floor to Laurence Vichard, who is personally a hero for me. She has been a real role model, and I am personally very inspired by her story. Laurence Vichard is the sports ambassador in France. She is a Legion of Honor in that country. She has won 3 world championships in karate. Her first world title was won in 1998 and the first European title in 1999. She also won the Open in Paris, and in parallel with her sports career, she also graduated from the School of Economics and Business and joined the sports department of the city of Marseille in 1998. Laurence is a founder and former president of the NGO Fight for Dignity, which starts sports programs that are adapted to women who have been victims of violence. Thank you, Laurence. You now have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Lorena. En tout cas, merci aussi. Ah, merci Elvia et à toute l'équipe. Grégory.
Thank you, Lorena. Thank you, Elvia, and thank you to the whole team. It's a true pleasure to be here with you all. Of course, this is an issue that is essential, the issue that we're here to discuss, which is at the core of sports. There are many of us here who are athletes working for peace and who want to continue to work because we know there's still a long way to go in this sense. Thank you, Lorena, for this presentation, and I'd like to take advantage of the moment to talk about the impact that sports may have in more vulnerable populations. Personally, I am very convinced. I am a very active activist of how important the tool is of sports. In this perspective of health and education, sports has a true impact in society. And so I would like to share with you my experience working with activists in sports internationally. I can tell you that nationally, there is an agency that is doing a fantastic work at hospitals. And currently, I am working with accessibility for women. I was really moved by Dominique Gues, the Nobel Prize, Peace Nobel Prize, who worked to help the women in Congo. This was a very innovative program to provide accompaniment to women who were victims between the ages of 12 and 18 who have suffered sexual violence or mutilation. 45 women who are refugees and who were accompanied by physicians and therapists and who are receiving professional training as well as music therapy to help them regain their autonomy and work in their process. So this is very important for us. This was brought up by Carlos when he mentioned the different programs that are being held, because we are faced with issues that relate to post-traumatic stress circumstances. When I first got into sports, I, at the time, was able to understand that sports practices are not always accessible for women. And I can tell this from my own story. As Rita said, sports can be a real solution, something that provides a real solution. Sports have an individual impact for women to recover their serenity, and sports can also contribute in a very holistic way for women to feel good, to reclaim their own bodies, and it also increases their chances to receive or attain inclusion. This is a program we are still continuing to work on. We are at the very beginning stages, and we are hoping to create synergies with everyone working in these issues. We have launched the research and action strategy. We are not experts in trauma, and we need to continue learning and how to be more effective. In my case, for example, I could be working more on karate, for example, but there are also other disciplines that require more work. And I'm thinking specifically about 3 women who were in this program, for example, Abem, and other 3 women who told me that they wanted to go back to their hometowns to relay what they had learned from karate to their mothers and grandmothers, cousins, and neighbors, because she didn't want them, they didn't want them to go through the same thing they had. So they have learned through karate the things that were really good for them. And for me, this feels like a great achievement, something that confirmed my conviction that physical activity can be accessible for all the girls and young women and women who are vulnerable. We are also working with girls who were victims of rape. And I have been asked before, why aren't you doing the same thing that you're doing in those other countries in France? And I do think the problem is, yes, we don't have a program like this in France for women who are victims of violence. So we decided to start in the north of Paris, working on training teachers, working with women who have been victims of domestic violence, excision, and also the criminalism such as pedophilia, and they have all access to psychologists, gynecologists, therapists, special services from the police, and as many experts as can provide accompaniment for these women to be able to heal. We also have a collaboration with the Strasbourg University for the research and the increasing the efficiency in the training of these women and allowing them to heal. We are also in the very first stages of this, but we firmly believe that our programs can become a solution for them. I can say, and I'm very sure to say, that this works, even though we may be at the early stages of it. We believe that every program that fosters gender equality and that fights discrimination is one that closely relates to sports. If linked with sports, the potential is huge. And I am very sure that we can go a really long way. And I know that also I am here thanks to the commitment of men who are also convinced of gender equality. The president of the association had trust in me, and it's because of him that I can be here today and that I can be working with this ministry. I am also here to attest to that, to the commitment of the French government surrounding this situation. I would like to share with you that the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, through its network of diplomats, also has commitments with embassies to identify projects and support these projects and the local associations, and support them as required with everything concerning sports, social inclusion, and equality. We have a very concrete example in Madagascar where we have an association called 15 years, and we have a team of women from different regions who, thanks to rugby, were able to have a better perspective on their own condition and were able to change their reality. And this was a project that was supported by the French government in Madagascar. But if we go even further, recently, the French Agency for Development has also become committed. It has been working with gender issues for a long time, but it has now very strongly committed to this issue as of late, supporting certain projects. And I'm thinking of one in particular in the African axis. There is the FIFA support program, which relates to the empowerment of women through soccer or football. The program is known as Campeonas, champions. There's something else that is also essential, which is that research and studies are important. There has to be research done in the different ecosystems so that we can know how to respond to the different needs so everyone can access sports. So I think this is all very important for accessibility, but also for peace. I would also like to mention something else. I don't know if I still have time for this, but this relates to the Generation Equality Forum, one that is very important for us, for every athlete and the person in sports, and for equality between men and women. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, would like this forum to become a very important moment for France. In preparation for the Milan Games, and the Game Committee 2024 is working closely with the Committee of Diversity and Equality, which is currently working on a certification to fight against discrimination. So we are working with experts, underscoring the best practices. So there is more visibility to the good practices nowadays, and this is something that I wanted to share with you this morning for you, afternoon for us, because it's 5 p.m. where I am, but I'm here also if you have any questions later. Thank you. Thank you very much, Laurence. And with these words, I would now like to give the floor to my friends from Peace and Sports. My heart is always with you, Josh, Gregory, who after the presentation, Laurent's presentation, it's a very good next step for this morning's event, because they will be sharing with us more about the values that cause sports to be really a peace-building tool. And they will now present to us a very innovative tool in this current context of lockdowns. So I would like to introduce Josh van der Smit, who is the General Secretary of Peace and Sports, an international organization based in Monaco under the sponsorship of Albert II, the Prince. He's also the president of Peace and Sports France and was previously the founding president of GAD Sports, and has also chaired 2 state businesses in the media areas, the Fronto channel and the Sofra channel. He was also the Vice Minister of Youth and Sports in France. And after George, we'll have Gregory Valladino, who is from Uruguay, who was Jiu-Jitsu world champion in 2002. And since 2009, he has been the member of the Club of Champions for Peace and Sports with the Peace and Sports organization, and has very wide experience working in social inclusion programs targeted at youth, and is currently the chair of the Uruguay Jiu-Jitsu Federation. With this presentation, I would now like to give the floor to Josh. Thank you, and thank you everyone for sharing these moments. I'd just like to talk about peace and sports for a few minutes with you. The history of our societies is one that usually talks more about war than peace. His books have historically talked about how communities have fell in conflicts, national, local, or international conflicts. But we know a lot about war, but what do we know about the processes for peace? Peace is not the end of war. It's not an interval between 2 wars. It's not the absence of war either. Peace is constructed slowly, and this is more difficult to do. And this reminds me of the words of Wittgenstein in his book, who said, "A single man can start a war, but for peace, 2 people are required." And I'd like to add that also more time and more energy, collective energy, is needed, more personal commitment. It requires a change of behavior so as to accept and respect the other. It also requires intelligence and imagination so as to explore all the clues, including the most original ones, and achieve the goal. At Peace and Sports, we are convinced from the beginning that sports can play an important role to help build sustainable peace. But how can this be done? I'd like to invite you to watch this video on some historical moments of peace through sports. Can we see the video, please? First video, thank you.
Since the beginning of humankind, exemplary men and women have been committed throughout the world. Through non-violent tactics and using diplomatic approaches, all of these people have helped to uphold peace in their own domains. Amongst these different actions, sport has emerged as a powerful tool for peace building, as it has the ability to reconcile people and to advance the rights of entire nations. Even in the darkest moments in history, values intrinsic in sport have enabled men and women to fraternize, engage in a truce. To affront racial supremacy and segregation, to help advance human rights and fight against all forms of discrimination. To encourage renewal of political dialogue and diplomacy where it no longer exists. To reconcile a people divided by apartheid and rebuild a nation. To defend humanity and promote social inclusion for all. There are so many striking examples that have enabled the peace through sport movement to become acknowledged as a legitimate force by international governing bodies and heads of state, and to be instrumental in launching the International Day of Sport for Development and Peace. Since its creation, this day has been incrementally recognizing sport initiatives that are addressing the ongoing global challenges. Faced with racism, gender inequality, economic crises, radicalization, and humanitarian tragedies that threaten global stability. Today, more than ever, the Peace Through Sport movement can be used for social change and to facilitate mutual understanding, dialogue, and inclusion. The values of sport alone can't resolve all problems, but these values offer a platform for world leaders, sport governing organizations, and NGOs to foster the conditions needed for sustainable peace, and to create a window of opportunity to give hope to future generations. The road to peace is difficult, and there's no time to lose. Sport is a powerful and proven peace-building tool. Today, it is time to mobilize global change through sport for the benefit of all. Game on for peace.
El deporte una herramienta poderosa para construir la paz. Lo digo de nuevo, es una evidencia.
Sport is a very powerful tool for peace. This is very clear for us. But what sports are we talking about? I'm not talking about sports as a business, as a show, because this can also be at the root of violence. This is not sports as a hobby either. I'm talking about organized and controlled activities with discipline and respect that allows for communication when there is no more dialogue, spaceport dialogue, that lays down bridges when only walls are around. So this is a sport that is part of the construction of the person and their integration in the collective. It is not possible to achieve peace in the world when you don't have inner peace, says the author. And this is precisely what we want to prove at Peace and Sports, to use sports as an universal language to promote human rights, connect people, reconcile divided communities, and fight against all forms of segregation. Everywhere where civil war, conflicts, natural catastrophe, or extreme poverty impede normal life. This has been proven. And more importantly, this has helped make a shift in the lives of many people. Lorena mentioned that Peace and Sports is an international organization, one that is neutral and independent, that was created in 2007 by world champion Jules Bourgeois. Under the sponsorship of His Highness, who is very interested in the activities of our organization. To prove the unifying and educational aspect of sports, we need to undertake concrete actions surrounding 4 core pillars: mobilizing, connecting, demonstrating and developing. And we do this through a variety of ways. We have local actions with model projects developed with governments and sports organizations, local clubs, NGOs in different parts of the world. Please visit our website where you will find the different experiences, games in Africa, for example, and Jordan. Also with the support of the Champions for Peace Club, which gathers more than 110 high-level sports athletes who are either veteran or active and convinced of the social role that they can play as role models for youth. They are at the vanguard of all of our actions. I'd like to pay homage to two of them. Ambassador Laurence Fischer, who is here today, who has shown in a very efficient way the links between classic diplomacy and soft diplomacy that's created by sports. Thank you, Laurence, for your actions. And Gregory, our former champion of Jiu-Jitsu, who, as has been mentioned, will present the technical innovations. One more word about our champions for peace. One of them, Didier Bormann, became the vice president of Business Sports last year. The International Business Sports Forum has gathered the greatest actors for peace, and it's key for the sports presence in the world and is helping amplify the message in the world. The next mission will happen in Medellin, Colombia next year, hopefully. It was planned for late this year, but the pandemic has caused us to cancel it. There's also a collaboration with UN agencies, UNESCO, the European Council, more than 50 federations, international sports federations, as well as several programs have been recognized officially as good practices by the UN, and more recently in the 2020 report of the General Secretary on the contribution of sports to the 2030 agenda. Among these initiatives, I'd like to mention very quickly the creation of the International Day of Sports for the Development and Peace, happening on April 6th, and with the Operation Wildcard, a project that was sustained by the UN and the International Olympic Committee. There's a lot more that I could say, but I'd rather say something different. The words of Nelson Mandela, which help us every day. Sports have the power to change the world, the power to inspire, the power to unite people in a way as many few other things can. By the way, this, as you know, was a very wise man who spoke about sports. Next, we have Grigori, who's going to be talking about the technology that we have developed this year and why we did it. Our top priority now, since we have a global community of actors for peace and sports, is to form, to have soldiers of peace who are peace builders, who use the latest technologies. The pandemic has given us the opportunity to accelerate in this sense. And it is extremely important to adapt our tools and increase the impact of our programs. Last year, we made an important decision. in the digitalizing of our technology tools, creating the first app that would help organization. And in the next 3 years, we will be dedicating more efforts to developing this mobile app to better support all the stakeholders in the field who use sports as a tool to build peace. Gregory, you may now take the floor. Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for this space to the Ibero University and this fourth conference. It's a great honor for me to be in representation of Peace and Sports and share with you a little bit of what this is about and talk about this app, which is Peace and Sport for my coach. This is a mobile app that directly connects with the methodology of Peace and Sports, a methodology that was developed thanks to 10 years of experience in the field, and which proposes a set of activities to work on the values that relate to the culture of peace through sports. An experience that is now available through a mobile app, as I just mentioned, developed by Peace and Sports in cooperation with my coach, which is the French sports technology leader. Peace and Sport, my coach, is an app that aims to become the first digital tool to use sports to build a culture of peace, something that is paramount for us. As George said, Peace and Sports, my coach, was officially recognized by the General Secretary of the UN as an innovative tool that promotes social investment and empowerment of the youth. This was in the report to the UN this year, which was dedicated to the contribution of sports to the 2030 agenda. I'd like to invite you now to watch this video that says more about this.
Bien. Bueno, les cuento que la aplicación brinda a los educadores un fácil...
The app provides very easy access to the Peace and Sports methodology, no matter where they are or what programs they are working with. The educational contents are in a tab, the Media Center tab, where videos and tutorials are shared, as well as digital documents to help support the work. Educators benefit from a methodology that is reliable, modern, easy to use, and easy to adapt. The updates, frequent updates, are very relevant for us, and so having the feedback is very important for us. The compiled data allow for Peace for Sports to monitor the impact of its actions, hence allowing to improve the programs based on the expectations of those who will benefit from them. I will now show you the 3 objectives that this app has. The first one is to build a peace culture using sports as a tool. The second objective is to become accessible as possible with the most people as possible. And the third objective is to improve the impact of programs through a precise, accurate evaluation of the actions. So this methodology, the Peace in Sports methodology, is built around 3 educational cycles, assisting the beneficiaries in acquiring values, attitudes, and behaviors which can help promote a culture of peace. And as I said, these 3 educational cycles allow to acquire key concepts of methodology surrounding the social actions that focus on the beneficiaries. In the second cycle, we focus on the other, across individual relations between them. Next, we have the coexisting notions, which are to promote a peace culture. So all 3 cycles are very important for us. We have more than 300 different exercises that we can use to organize sessions for as long as 2 years. Because of the situation today, because of COVID-19 and its impact in international traveling, Peace and Sports have had to find an alternative to train the educators. And for this reason, we have created an e-learning platform to help form or train educators for peace about positive habits and acquiring the skills they need to help promote the culture of peace. And thanks to dynamic contents, these peace educators can make all the methodology and content their own and using this digital tool, so they can really take advantage of all the content they can find there. So using this e-learning platform, it includes the Peace and Coach and Sports app to offer a learning tool, one with accessible and sustainable training resources for everyone. I hope this platform will receive the promotion it deserves. This is a very, very valuable tool that will help all the workers that today are helping around the world. So I'd like to thank you for your time and thank the Universidad Iberoamericana for this space. And I'd like to say hi to everyone who is watching. Thank you. Thank you, Gregory, for this presentation. You were right. The Peace and Sports app is a very, very straightforward, easy to use, valuable tool that provides short-term changes and results to leverage the benefits of sports. And I had some questions for the panelists, but I already have a few questions from the audience, so I'm going to prioritize on the questions from the audience. The first one I see here is for Carlos. He asks, what are the strategic lines that public policies must have to implement actions for the linkage of youth, peace, and gender equality? What are the strategic lines for public policy?
É uma pergunta interessante e desafiante. Em primeiro lugar, deve-se uma política.
First, I think that we need a policy that allows us to access sports practices for women. And second, a policy and strategy that is built with the sports agents that are involved in many different levels in the national and international context, with the sports federation, and built on a gender perspective. And thirdly, a strategy that is based on evidence and based on concrete goals. So I think I would say probably those three pillars would be ideal to structure a policy that helps increase female participation and promote peace in sports.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Carlos. Y justamente...
Thank you, Carlos. And there's another question that relates to the same topic, which is for Laurence. In Mexico, there is a big problem, which is violence against women, where women are victims of different types of violence. So the question here is how to create alliances between universities in Mexico and your initiative in France. How is it possible to strengthen these alliances to help women who have been victims of violence and therefore promote gender equality?
Et merci pour cette excellente question. Je pense que ça rejoint tout l'enjeu.
Thank you very much for an excellent question. I think this relates closely to the forum that will be organized between Mexico and France, which relates to sports and equality. It's important to work together and to share our skills so that we can have public and private policies working together with everyone, NGOs and institutions. I think this collaboration is crucial, especially when it comes to facing the pandemic, for example. Something that the French government is doing today, Isabel Moreno, is very committed with this and is doing so in collaboration with the Ministry of Sports and our sports minister. So the idea here is to have a common ground, to coordinate, to confront crisis. And it's important here to underscore that this is also part of law. Law and jurisdiction are important here too. That this is really the starting point if we are to reduce violence. And let me take a very concrete example of the pandemic here, like the Kivu region. Where we have impunity. So this is where we need to begin with the abolishing impunity. We can also contribute other elements from the sports arena, of course, but it's a very complex matter. And this is not a situation or a problem that has just started. This is a very, very old-standing problem. But the issue here is adding more power to collectivity, because here together we are stronger.
Muchas gracias, Laurence.
Thank you, Laurence. And
Y quisiera hacer una pregunta,
I'd now like to ask a question to Rita, because speaking of how we are stronger together, there is a question here. What concrete actions would be the most important to be included in universities and schools to promote inclusion of these of persons with disabilities? What concrete actions in colleges and schools?
Thank you for your question. It's a very important one as well. Well, I would say there are two options. We have a very interesting education program for schools, for school children, so until age 18. It's called I Am Possible. So it's coming from the closing ceremony in Sochi, where there was the words I impossible, and that moved to I am possible. So we used that title for this education program, and it's a really interesting program to make kids aware of what living with a disability is, what it's all about. They play sport together, but they also include athletes with disabilities as a part of the education. So I think that is an education program that is available through the Paralympic Committee of Mexico, if they want to spread that along the country. But also, I think for universities and so on, it's important to see, you know, if the universities are they open for people with disabilities? Do they study already there? And if they are, so you can also use these persons to interact together about how their life is. And of course, playing sport with, you know, for example, playing wheelchair basketball is good fun to play that together with people with and without disabilities. Also to get a kind of feeling how it is to be in a wheelchair. Or we have a sport that's called goalball. It's a ball sport for people who are blind. So just to experience that, as you know, we are fully sighted, but if you play that sport, it opens your eyes in a way, because then you think about, oh wow, this is difficult. How do they do this? So you get through sport, you get a better understanding. So I think there are lots of examples of programs. If you can include in your different topics in the university, also to include people with disabilities. I hope this helps a little bit.
Muchas gracias, Rita. Efectivamente,
Thank you, Rita. I remember playing soccer with blindfolded once, and it's really, how do they do it? It's amazing. It's not easy to do at all. I have a question for Peace and Sports. This question has come up a few times. How can Peace and Sports, or what kind of presence does it have in Mexico and any other Latin American countries, and what are these actions like, and how can Peace and Sports have a greater link with the rest of the world and with Latin America? Well, at the moment, we have not yet identified a program in Mexico. 2 or 3 years ago, personally, I had contact with the local associations in the field, working in the low-income neighborhoods of Mexico City, but as such, we have not developed any programs, or we have not identified any realistic efforts. We are planning and we are hoping to leverage the opportunity of the International Forum to take place next year in Medellin, Colombia, so as to gather all the efforts and all the initiatives of the Central and South American stakeholders so we can identify any possibilities to work on similar programs as the ones we have in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Gregory, is there anything you'd add here? Yes. To echo George's words, we have no presence in Mexico as of now. We hope this will be the case. We have worked in Colombia, in Bolivar City, a project called Jiu-Jitsu por la Paz or Jiu-Jitsu for Peace in a very, very impoverished area of Bogota. And this was a very good experience working with the community. And sometimes when we're alone in this battle and we are the first to start with a new initiative somewhere, the community really takes to it and with good eyes. And so this stood up so far has had excellent results. And today, these young people who at the time were really young are now professionally working here. There are some medal winners even. And with the help of the Colombian Jiu-Jitsu Federation and the Olympic Committee of Colombia have received support. And of course, Peace and Sport with our participation in the field and with providing accompaniment. And in the past, we didn't have a digital manual, but now we're expecting the app to be ready soon so we can work in the field more easily. I'd like to add here that we are very, well, we know that there is still a lot to do in these countries, and we are very open to proposals for partnerships in these countries. Thank you, Josh, and I'd like to complement this answer by saying that since 3 years ago, Mexico has joined the celebration of the International Day for Sports for Peace, as George and Carlos mentioned before, with the white card. For those who don't know what this is, the white card is a campaign that takes place on April 6th, the International Day of Sports for Peace and Development, where we invite people to join in to take a picture with a white piece of paper as a symbol of inclusion and peace. And the Iberoamericana University has joined this effort in the last few years, as well as other federations in Mexico. The committee, the Mexican committee, has joined this effort. And in Mexico, I think a real awareness raising is taking place. Now, there's still a long way to go on the positive impact that sports can have in a multi-sectorial or cross-sectorial way. So next, I'd like to ask, I have another question for Carlos. Are there any studies concerning socio-emotional education related to the culture of peace through sports, and where is it possible to consult? It's an excellent question. Thank you. There are some studies. There's actually a list of all these studies conducted in Portugal. And there is one on human motricity, a group that conducted 2 different projects that relate to violence in the sports context. And the red card to bullying. And the second one is called Sports Without Bullying. And this group of researchers have researched the different types of forms of bullying and harassment in the sports context. We also have a network of researchers in Europe that research this matter. And of course, I would be happy to share this information later if I can, so that I can share the materials developed by this investigator. This so you can find articles from these authors. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. So please, well, we're going to add the name of the author to the chat so everyone can do their search on it. A question for Rita. You mentioned, you were talking about inclusion. What is the gender perspective when it comes to this issue?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was not mentioned at all by me. I realized that. And it's because as a movement, gender is something that is included everywhere. So what I say is that every program we run or every activity we run, it is a kind of a request to have you know, participants from both gender, and so we are very working very hard to also find female participants, because it shows that it's more difficult to find them. So we are really working hard towards these programs. And also, as you have seen, you know, our chef de mission for the refugee team is also a female. So we really sometimes push to have these role models for functions that are really important for us. So it's more a kind of general approach we have as a movement. And of course, there is a lot of work still to do on different topics like coaches, because we've seen that, you know, in participation it's going better and better, but for coaching and technical officials in the games and at the different sports is more challenging. So we have specific programs also we run to increase female participation in leadership positions, for example. And sometimes we also run, like last year, we have run a specific athletics program for only for girls in Africa. So it was really an amazing experience to see the girls coming from different countries together. What was interesting for me, because I was there to be a part of it, and was that the girls had so much potential also for the sport, and they were not aware that they were that good. So actually from a group of 30, there were already, I think, 8 that qualified, because we are running a training camp there. It's based on their, you know, technical skills for the sport, but we were also running a program for their own personal skills and to grow as a person and as an athlete. And what it means if you want to, for example, try to be at the Paralympic Games. So it was a full package with different education. But in the end, they also participated 2 days in an international competition, because we really wanted to give them the full experience. And it was interesting that already 8 out of that whole group were qualifying for, they had the minimal qualification limit for the Tokyo Paralympic Games. So they had no clue that they were already that good in their sport. So it was, we also do these things to really showcase sometimes the female, the girls and the female participants. So we do different topics, but in general, we have a good focus also on, you know, inclusion of people with disabilities, but also the gender balance in everything we do. Thank you.
Gracias, Rita. Para
Thank you,
completar,
Rita. And so there's another question, whether these programs include Down syndrome boys and girls.
We have sometimes there are, yes, specifically in programs we do for athletics and swimming, and also table tennis. There are participants with intellectual disabilities as well.
muchas gracias. Y
Thank you very much. And actually, there is a question here for Laurence. What are the main challenges of working in a country like Congo, where violence against women is systemic? What are the challenges in developing a sports program in a country where violence is systemic and it's a way of living and has been so and so normalized for so long?
En fait, c'est un peu tout ce qu'a réussi à faire le docteur Denis Mukwege avec ses équipes. C'est vrai que c'est qu'il a créé
the work that has been done with the entire team has been working with a network around the hospital that was really a safe place. The real estate value of the area grew even because of everything that was done with the hospital. So we have worked with these women who are victims of stigma and for whom social inclusion was something hard to achieve. And around them, a lot of work was done. I'm thinking about Tatiana and the victims' organizations who are very solidary, who share their means. I'm thinking about the City of Joy. Together they bought land, and this created a virtuous cycle where little by little they created the room for the economic autonomy and food autonomy as well. They learned how to grow their own food in many cases, created very special spaces, especially here I'm thinking, of course, about women who are victims of this violence and these circumstances. But this is a very concrete example on how it is possible to remove the stigma of a vulnerable population and help them find jobs. And what the doctor did here too was also a way to face impunity and working through international organizations for them to mobilize and provide accompaniment to political actors in order to face the impunity. So small steps are being taken because the situation in itself is, of course, a more global program. In a very modest way, we are contributing with the Peace and Sports tool. So it's like we're just putting in the seeds, which are small actions through small actions. As Rita said, we are working at the education level, something that is essential physical activity, sports, through educational programs such as positive masculinity. We're trying to help change some perspectives, but this takes time. And it is true that the context and the very delicate surroundings of these populations cause for the work to be very complex and difficult to achieve, but we are getting there. Thank you very much, Laurence. And actually, one of the questions here that was, is for anyone who'd like to answer it. What is the responsibility of universities? What kind of actions need to be implemented in universities in order to contribute to building peace with a gender perspective in sports? What kind of actions can sports or the universities have? Who would like to answer this question?
Je me permets, parce que moi, ça fait 1 an que je suis à mes fonctions d'ambassadrice dans mon ministère.
Well, I have been an ambassador of the ministry since a year ago. And I think
de se connecter, et ça peut être un accélérateur justement dans l'échange de bonnes pratiques.
Helping universities to cooperate, to connect with others. We are consolidating the exchanges between researchers. We are doing this. We're trying to achieve cooperation with universities and other organizations. This is not something that is done very often, but concerning sexual violence in Kibu, for example, and the work that is done there, we are also collaborating with the Strasbourg University. And universities, of course, can collaborate with each other when working with the same topics. And in France, of course, we want to have cooperations established between universities so they can cooperate, compare data. And as a government, we want to allow for them to also cooperate with each other and even finance university collaboration projects. Thank you. Josh, you wanted to say something too, right?
Laurence, que es una persona brillante y modesta.
Yes. To talk about politics, we need to talk about making small steps. And I'd like to say here that sports is an accelerator to these political changes. We see this year by year. What the champion can do is huge, and so to invest in champions for us is a priority. And the second priority is to invest in their training. As we have said, this is a priority for us. We need to have an army of soldiers for peace, of educators for peace. And the leaders, university leaders all around the world, we will be able to work with them in many instances because the champions are so important. Thank you, George. Carlos? There is, of course, a very big responsibility that research has, but developing research projects that apply to the sports context, to decode the scientific language to help the sports agents build programs. This is an important role that universities and other institutions have. For example, the National Observatory of Violence in Sports, violence against those who this includes anyone, any person or and research the materials necessary for training sport stakeholders. Thank you, Carlos. I have talked with Gregory in the past, who is someone who is very humble, but has a really long experience working with young people in vulnerable contexts and in contexts that are not at all easy. And in fact, young people who have a very difficult past. And Josh before was talking about how to use these athletes so that they can become role models. Would you like to share some of your experiences working with these young women and men? You have worked in Colombia, Brazil, Uruguay. Well, these are very, very nice experiences, very moving and shocking. But I think when you have an intervention with these youngsters, the only thing that matters is that you are there to support and help them. My experience is that there are many youngsters who don't have a way or know the way ahead, and when an organization or a program comes and try to lend them a hand, they take advantage of it, and this is great. I remember this girl who had a history of abuse and violence of different kinds and a broken family. And one day she saw a jiu-jitsu studio, and for her it was difficult to join in because she had been victim of violence. And if you touch her, she reacted. She had a hard time trying to smile. But she saw in sports a channel out, a way out, a way to channel all of this frustration, channeling it through sports. And with the help of sports and with the help of the trainer, in this case, it was me, we were able to work with her to make her feel comfortable and tell her that if she would continue to work hard, she would achieve the best results. And so she realized that if she trained and she was respectful, and if she put her shoes next to the tatami, if she did everything with a diligence, she would be able to come maybe to a day out and visit somewhere new with us. And so for her, this was a great experience. It was a very nice experience. And She ended up competing around the world. She was a bronze medal in a, globally. And today, she is my assistant. She helps me with social programs. She is now the role model for other youngsters. So yes, as Carlos said, they need a lot of training so that they can help these youngsters. To have the technology that allows us today to train these trainers remotely and provide them with the necessary tools.
Oui, et si je peux rajouter, merci Grégory pour ton témoignage, c'est que ce que tu dis, c'est qui est important, c'est qu'on en est au début, mais qu'à un moment donné, ces initiatives, on a besoin de les mesurer, d'avoir il faut qu'on mesure l'impact scientifiquement, il faut qu'on aille plus loin pour qu'en même temps, à un moment donné, que ça devienne systématique, parce qu'on sait, nous, que ça fonctionne. On le sait sur le terrain, on y est et on voit l'impact et tu en témoignes magnifiquement bien. Mais à un moment donné, il faut aussi que politiquement, on s'approprie ces sujets, on les considère à leur juste valeur et qu'on soit en mesure de considérer que ça a un fort impact social et qu'on y mette les moyens. Et on n'a pas besoin de tant de moyens que ça pour ce que représente aujourd'hui l'activité physique adaptée, le sport, pour accompagner les populations en difficulté. Et c'est vraiment le message que je veux faire passer aujourd'hui aussi, c'est de dire qu'il faut qu'on continue à documenter, à avoir des datas, à prouver scientifiquement que ça fonctionne, parce qu'on ne peut plus continuer comme ça, à le faire ponctuellement de manière anonyme. Il faut qu'on travaille ensemble, tous ensemble, pour qu'on ait des moyens et qu'on puisse toucher encore plus la population, parce qu'on sait que le sport et l'activité physique adaptée, c'est une vraie solution pour les populations en difficulté.
Gracias, Laurence. Y nos quedan 3 minutos y una.
Thank you, Laurent. We have 3 more minutes and one last question.
Una pregunta muy pertinente. Dicen, ¿cuáles estrategias?
What are the strategies, or how is it possible to ensure that the dynamics and strategies that are necessary for the sports to not be competitive, to be more inclusive than competitive? Where or how is it possible to make sure that the programs are inclusive and not just competitive? Does anyone have anything to add here? Many people talk about competitiveness in sports versus the message of cooperation. Who would like to answer to this? Carlos.
Dar o exemplo da Seleção Nacional de Rugby da Nova Zelândia, que assenta a sua elevada competitividade, sobretudo numa
the competitiveness, especially in a social perspective, is something important. And of course, here what matters most is the training of citizens, a commitment and a spirit. So competition has to come together with inclusion. Gregory, I think you wanted to add something. In this case of martial arts, for example, it's important to know that the value of sports is not just about practicing. Of course, to be competitive is good as long as it's a balanced competition, because competition helps them strive to become better. But someone who has received a good education, training, and once again, training and education is at the core of everything. Maybe one last word from Rita?
Yes, thank you. It's an interesting question. And I was thinking about the situation in Africa with kids with disabilities. And for example, kids who lost, you know, they are born with limb deficiency or they had accidents. So there it's interesting that making sure these kids get prostheses is the first step towards inclusion, because we have heard from especially a NICE project, Jumping Kids, please take a look. It's so they first find the kids that are not participating at all in society. They don't go to school, they don't participate in anything because their mobility is not okay. So when they get these prostheses, they can they become more mobile, they can go to school, and at school they can participate in sport. So there is completely the opposite way where, you know, mobility and these blades they are using. Normally people think, oh, these blades are for you know, Paralympic sport, but these blades are really for mobility and then for inclusion and then for sport. So it's an interesting different perspective I would bring to the table. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you all. And with those last words, I'd like to thank all the panelists. It's dark now on this side of the world, and I'd really like to thank you to the Ibero-American University. I'm sure that Elvia will share the remaining questions with us so I can relay them to the panelists. So we'll have the closing now.
Muchas gracias, Lore. Bueno, pues no nos queda más que agradecer muchísimo a nuestros panelistas.
A big thank you to all our panelists, Laurence, Rita, Gregory. Lorena, thank you very much for acting as a moderator. And the panel's recording in the different languages is available. I'm going to share it with you, I hope, on Monday. We have been sharing it in all our social media platforms of the Ibero-American University. And to say that for us in Congress, it's always important to have a panel on peace and sports that relates to human rights and gender equality. And invite you also to our conferences for next week, the last ones. November 9th, starting at 9 a.m. Gender perspective in the positive transformation of conflicts and building of peace. Experience of Mexico and Colombia, organized by CPAZ Mexico and the Education and Research Center for the Peace in Spain. Thank you, Peace and Sports. And Fight for Dignity, thank you for the organizations for the Institute of Sports and Dignity of Portugal. It's been a great panel. Thank you very much.
A ustedes.
Obrigado.